Alright, so in this video we want to look at some just questions under the ellipses, and yeah, these are the two questions. One where we are told to find the foci, the vertices and sketch, and then the one where they've given us the foci and the vertices, and then we're asked to find the equation. So we'll start with question one. Find the foci, vertices and sketch each of the following. Okay, one thing that you actually need to understand each single time is about the equation. First of all, whenever you see additions, just know that if you've not specified the conic section, know that you're dealing with the ellipse. Okay, and then if it's a minus, know that you're dealing with hyperbola, right? Okay, I hope that's clear. Okay, so now each time ensure that they're in the form of x squared plus x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared is equal to a 1. So for the first one, you can actually see that it's not in that form, so we have to put it in that form, right? Okay, then the other thing that you actually need to note is when you look at x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared is equal to 1. It's very key and important to understand that when you are writing it in this form, whatever you are going to start with is the one that is having a greater value or a greater denominator. What that tells us is if it's in this form, a should be greater than b. Okay, so that this is this is actually going to be do you some good, because this will help you remember to say, if I've got x squared having a greater denominator, then I'm dealing with an ellipse that is the major axis is along the x-axis. And then in a case where if y squared is having a greater value or denominator, you start with y squared like that, then you know, again, you'll be able to tell by the number that is down there that actually what I have is the major axis along the y-axis. That's going to do some good. So always write it, start with one that is having a bigger denominator, so that you're able to tell. If you're starting with x, it's along the x-axis. If you're starting with y, like that. Okay, I hope that's clear. So we can actually, one thing that we know is we need to have a 1 as the constant on the right, so we can actually just divide by 144. 144. Okay, so of course 144 by 144 is actually a 1. Now 144, if you divide by 16, that's 9 times, so we have 9y squared. No, so that's going to be y squared. 16 into 144 is 9 times, equal to 1. And then of course if you divide again 144 by the 9, it's going to give you 16, right? 144 divided by 9, so x squared over 16. Okay, so this is what I was talking about. Now in this case we can see that 16 is of course greater than 9, so we'll leave it in that form. Now how do we distinguish with a b? This is where you have to be smart about it. Okay, that's what I was saying now. So for the sake of our b, it's advisable that you start with y squared. That's me advising you, so that you are able to tell to say that's going to be along the y-axis. The major axis is going to be along the y-axis. Okay, so now that you get that point, we've come up with our equation and we can easily pick it up from here. Now one thing that we said is the basic form of the equation is x squared over a squared plus y squared divided by b squared equal to a 1. So we can find our value of a. So a squared is equal to 16. So a is equal to plus or minus root of 16, which is going to be a 4. And then we can also find our b squared. Now b squared, of course, which we know when we are talking about an ellipse, it's a squared minus c squared. Okay, so therefore if our b squared is now in this case of course 9, and then of course b squared is 9, yeah. And then our a squared is 16 minus c squared. Okay, so c squared becomes 16 minus 9, and then c squared becomes 7, so c becomes plus or minus root of 7. Okay, so what did I say? Said the major axis is along the x-axis if x is one that is having a greater denominator, right? So therefore this is going to be something like this. Okay, if that's a center, okay, point of intersection with the minor axis, and then we've got the foci, of course, which should be inside. Okay, so since the foci is actually the shorter one, now the question that you need to ask yourself, between 4 and root of 7, which one is smaller? Of course root of 7, right? So that's going to be negative root of 7 comma 0, and then positive root of 7 comma 0. That's what are the foci. So the foci, if the major axis is along the x-axis, is given by plus or minus c comma 0. Then for the vertices, going to get the bigger values, so negative 4 comma 0, and then 4 comma 0. Okay, and of course it might interest you that b actually represents the value of the values along the minor axis. So the vertices on the minor axis are going to be positive 3 and negative 3, which actually implies 0 comma negative 3 and then 0 comma positive 3. So which implies the vertices along the y-axis on the minor axis is going to be 0 comma plus or minus b. These are the vertices. So that's how you come up with the ellipse there. Now hopefully you've gotten some of the things that I've said. Found the foci and the vertices. So now this other one, what do we do? How do we handle that one? Please feel free to pause the video and try it out. Okay, so like I said, start with the one that is having a greater denominator, in this case 16 plus x squared over 9, and then that's equal to 1. Okay, so in this case, whenever you start with y squared, you understand that the ellipse is going to be along the y-axis, the major axis is going to be the y-axis, and then the minor will be along the x-axis. Okay, so simple and straightforward, right? So y squared over a squared plus x squared over b squared is equal to 1. Our a squared in this case is equal to 16. Our b squared in this case is equal to 9. So our a squared, or our a becomes plus or minus 4. Now we understand that our b squared is actually equal to a squared minus c squared. So since we know that our b squared is 9, our a squared is 16, we can easily find our c squared, which of course is still going to be plus or minus the root of 7. Okay, and then we found a, b, and c, right? So our b is plus or minus 3. Now don't forget, this is going to be along the the y-axis. So we have to put the foci inside. So foci is going to be a smaller value if you compare A and C. So of course root of 7 and negative root of 7, and then the bigger values are 4 and 4. So something like this. Don't mind my drawing, it's kind of difficult to draw on the laptop. Okay, something like that though. Okay, so that's 4, this is negative 4. So we have 0 plus or minus 4 for our vertices, and then for the foci we have 0 comma plus or minus root of 7, and then of course for the minor axis, the vertices there, we're going to have negative 3 and positive 3. Okay, so hopefully I've given you a way that can help you remember the equation for the ellipse, and you're able to handle the questions with confidence. And of course, when you look at the tutorial sheet, I think you'll be able to handle the questions with confidence. Now, with everything that I've given you, are you able to actually write the equation when you're given the foci and the vertices? Remember, we're going to do the opposite of what we've been doing. So pause the video and try this one out. So hoping you have, this is very simple, right? So think of our equation. Our equation is in the form of x squared over a squared plus y squared over b squared, which is equal to c, no, equal to a constant over 1. And the secret is your a is supposed to be bigger, right? So the vertices are the ones that were favor. Okay, so they are the ones that we are getting the value of a, right? So a is plus or minus 3. Now the question is it along the y-axis or the x-axis? So that's 0 comma, so it's along the y-axis. So in this case the equation actually changes the form. It's y squared over a squared plus x squared over b squared. However, in known, that's x comma y. That's x comma y. So the vertices and the foci have been given to be along the y-axis. So the equation is in this form instead. So we know that if a is plus or minus 3, then we understand that a squared is going to be what? Square the 3 is going to be 9. So we already found what we need to put there. Now for our b squared, we know that our b squared is equal to a squared minus c squared, where our c squared is a value that now represents distance to the foci, right? So our b squared is what we're trying to find. Our a squared, it's 9. Our c squared is obviously going to be the square of the 2, which is going to be 4. Okay, so b squared becomes 9 minus 4, that gives us 5. So b becomes plus or minus the root of 5. So we're interested actually in just b squared itself. So we end up with the equation becoming y squared over 9 plus x squared over 5 is equal to a 1. That's our equation. Simple and straightforward. I first of all looked at the coordinates we were given for the foci and the vertices. The y-axis is what was given, so it implied it was going to be something like this. And then so I had to start my equation with y squared over a squared, and then I was able to find my a squared because a squared in the a value represents the distance. Okay, the a value represents the distance to the vertices, and then the c value represents the distance to foci in this case, and then of course we have to put b squared instead of c squared, where we know b squared is a squared minus c squared. And so we substitute the value of a squared and c squared to help us find the value of b squared, and that's what we end up with. Okay, so that's it to this video. Thank you very much for watching.